Welcome back to Warscope Analysis, the channel that refuses to sanitize reality, that refuses to dress strategic catastrophe in the language of comfort, and that instead delivers the unfiltered operational truth about the conflicts and power shifts reshaping the global order in real time. Tonight, we are stepping into a scenario that, if realized in the real world, would stand as one of the most consequential naval events in modern history. A moment where the assumptions that have defined global military balance for decades are not gradually challenged, but violently overturned in a single, overwhelming engagement. This is not simply about a ship, not simply about a battle, but about the potential collapse of a foundational belief, the belief that American carrier strike groups represent an untouchable instrument of power projection, capable of entering any region, asserting control, and leaving without facing existential risk from regional actors. In this scenario, that belief is tested against a new reality, one defined not by isolated technological breakthroughs, but by the convergence of scale, coordination, and strategic intent operating at a level that existing defensive frameworks were never designed to fully absorb. A United States carrier strike group moves toward the Persian Gulf, entering one of the most strategically sensitive maritime corridors on Earth, a region where geography compresses space, where surveillance is constant, and where the margin for error is effectively non-existent. The Strait of Hormuz is not just another waterway, it is a choke point through which a significant portion of the world's energy supply flows, a location where military presence is inseparable from economic stability. For decades, the presence of American naval power in this region has served as both deterrence and assurance, a visible guarantee that global energy flows will remain uninterrupted. But deterrence relies not only on capability, but on perception, and perception can change far more rapidly than capability itself. In this scenario, the strike group enters with full confidence in its defensive architecture, supported by advanced radar systems, layered missile defenses, electronic warfare capabilities, and a doctrine refined over decades of operational experience. On paper, it is more than capable of defending itself against conventional threats. But war is not fought on paper, and the environment it encounters has been shaped by an adversary that has spent years studying those very assumptions. The engagement does not begin with a massive strike, it begins quietly, almost subtly, with probing actions designed not to destroy, but to observe, to map responses, to collect data, small scale contacts, drones, radar signals, irregular movements across the maritime domain, each action contributing to a growing picture of how the strike group detects, tracks, and responds to perceived threats. This phase is critical because modern warfare is as much about information as it is about firepower. By the time the main engagement begins, the defensive posture of the strike group is no longer an unknown variable. It is a mapped system, analyzed and understood to a degree that allows for precise targeting of its limitations. And then, without warning, the engagement shifts from observation to execution. What follows is not a conventional missile attack. It is saturation at a scale that transforms the engagement from a tactical encounter into a systemic overload. Hundreds, potentially thousands of inbound threats launched from multiple vectors, coastal platforms, mobile launch systems, maritime assets, and possibly subsurface positions, all coordinated to arrive within overlapping time windows. This is the critical factor, timing. The missiles do not arrive in sequence. They arrive as a compressed wave designed to collapse the defensive timeline, to force the system into a state where decisions must be made faster than they can be processed. The radars track, the interceptors launch, the defensive systems engage exactly as designed, and yet the problem is no longer capability, it is capacity. Every interceptor expended reduces the remaining defensive potential. Every second lost reduces the engagement window. And as the volume of inbound threats exceeds the system's maximum handling capacity, gaps begin to appear. not because the system has failed, but because it has been overwhelmed. This is the brutal reality of saturation warfare. It does not require perfect weapons, it requires sufficient numbers, coordination, and timing. And once that threshold is crossed, penetration is not a possibility, it is an inevitability. In this scenario, the consequences are catastrophic. Multiple impacts, cascading damage, loss of operational control, and ultimately the neutralization of a platform that was never expected to face this level of threat. But the physical damage is only one layer of the outcome. The deeper impact lies in what the event represents. A carrier strike group is more than a military asset. It is a strategic signal, a demonstration of reach, power, and control. Its loss or neutralization under these conditions sends a message that extends far beyond the battlefield. The immediate global reaction would be shock, not just within military circles, but across financial markets, energy sectors, and political systems. The Strait of Hormuz, already one of the most critical energy choke points in the world, would instantly become a zone of extreme uncertainty. Oil markets would react within minutes, not hours, as traders price in the risk of disruption. Shipping companies would reassess routes, insurance costs would surge, and the flow of energy that underpins the global economy would face unprecedented pressure. Even without further escalation, the perception of vulnerability would be enough to trigger cascading economic effects. This is the interconnected nature of modern power, where military events translate directly into economic consequences on a global scale. At the same time, the strategic credibility of deterrence would come under intense scrutiny. Allies who rely on American security guarantees would be forced to reassess their assumptions, not necessarily abandoning those relationships, but questioning their reliability under evolving threat conditions. Adversaries, on the other hand, would interpret the event as evidence that existing power structures are not as stable as they appear, potentially encouraging more assertive behavior in other regions. This is how localized events can trigger global shifts, not through immediate large scale conflict, but through gradual changes in perception and behavior that alter the balance over time. The question of response becomes the most complex aspect of the scenario. Any military retaliation carries the risk of escalation within a region that is already highly volatile. Striking back could lead to a broader conflict, potentially disrupting global energy flows on an even larger scale. Choosing restraint, however, carries its own risks, particularly in terms of credibility and deterrence. Economic measures, sanctions, and diplomatic actions may be employed, but they operate on longer timelines and may not provide the immediate reassurance required to stabilize the situation. This creates a strategic dilemma with no perfect solution, only trade-offs between competing risks. What makes this scenario particularly significant is that it is not purely hypothetical in its foundations. The elements that define it, advanced missile systems, saturation tactics, electronic warfare integration, and asymmetric strategies, are all present in modern military development. The trajectory of these capabilities suggests a future in which traditional assumptions about dominance and vulnerability must be reevaluated. The era in which technological superiority alone guaranteed operational security is increasingly being challenged by approaches that focus on overwhelming systems rather than outclassing them individually. As we step back and look at the broader picture, the real question is not whether such a scenario will happen exactly as described, but whether the underlying dynamics are already reshaping the strategic environment. The answer increasingly appears to be yes. Power is becoming more distributed, risks are becoming more complex, and the margin for error is narrowing. This does not mean that existing powers lose their capabilities overnight, but it does mean that the conditions under which those capabilities can be effectively applied are changing. History rarely announces its turning points in advance. They often become visible only in hindsight, when events reveal the limitations of previously accepted truths. This scenario represents one of those potential turning points, a moment that forces a reconsideration of how power is projected, how it is defended, and how it is perceived in a world that is becoming less predictable and more contested with each passing year. So the question now is simple, but the answer is anything but. If the era of uncontested naval dominance is being challenged, what replaces it? And how do nations adapt to a reality where even the most advanced systems can be pushed to their limits? Drop your analysis in the comments because every perspective adds clarity to a situation that is still evolving. If this breakdown gave you insight beyond the surface level narrative, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay connected because the next phase of global conflict is not coming. It is already here, unfolding in real time, shaping the world in ways that we are only beginning to understand.